The exhibition looks at women who married airmen during World War II and of different nationality to themselves. And when the war was over, they changed country for their husband. My mother is a war bride. And at the time I was growing up, I didn't know there were any other war brides. She never spoke about it. And I think it's become very important to me because all these other women, their stories fill in the blanks in my mother's story that I never heard from her lips. Eileen, she was in the Royal Air Force, and she wrote a story about getting ready for the dances, again in the hangars with the big planes out. And when she went to one of those dances, she met the man who would change her life, actually. Eileen was 19 when she came to Canada, and her mother had packed a ball gown for her for a new life. In reality, she was alone in a small rented house on the prairies, and she didn't even have a coat that was capable of dealing with the extremely bitter cold of the winter. Her husband met her at Christmas time. He marched her off and bought her the best coat that he could afford to buy, a warm fur coat. And she says, "This quote was a lifesaver for me that year. In my loneliness, I walked into the village snug and warm, and at night I laid it on the bed to help keep me warm in the unheated night. Although the water in the pails froze and the plants all turned black, I survived the intense cold of my first Canadian winter with the help of my new fur coat." I really like Jane's story. She was a teenager and she opened the door to two American airmen. One of them was dating her sister at the time. Jean was wearing a leopard print skirt made from the curtains, and the young airman was a brash young American, and he kind of intoned, "Hold that tiger." And she was quite offended. She thought they hadn't even been properly introduced. But Bill, his name was, Bill courted Jean, and when he was deployed to France, he dropped her a note tied to a small parachute saying that he would write to her, and when he returned, he brought a case of French champagne for their wedding. The research process was interesting. I did a huge portrait of my mother just for myself when she turned 80. It's 8 feet by 6 feet, and it ended up on the front cover of a newspaper in New Zealand. And through that process, war brides contacted me. At the start, they were war brides in New Zealand. When I returned to Canada, it was Canadian war brides, American war brides. So I've met all the women, or almost all the women. The stories have been shared with me over cups of tea and open photograph albums. So they're private stories that have been entrusted to me.